Greetings. Welcome to the very first lecture in our Global Education Lecture Series, a new initiative by the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and International Programs at the University of Iowa to discuss issues facing international educational interchange. My name is Yashwant Prakash Vyas. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am Assistant Director for Diversity Resources in the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Before we start our conversation today, it is vital that we recognize Indigenous peoples as traditional stewards of this land. It is important to understand the long-standing history that has brought us to reside on this land and to strive to understand our place within this history. As a first step, with permission from the University of Iowa's Native American Council, I will now read a land acknowledgement they have created. I also want to recognize my limitations and apologize for any mispronunciations. I can do better. I need to do better. And I ask for your grace and forgiveness as I strive to do better. The University of Iowa is located on the homelands of the Chippewa, Iowa, Kickapoo, Menominee, Miami, Missouri, Omaha, Osage, Otto, Ottawa, Ponca, Potawatomi, Sac and Fox, Sioux, 3 affiliated tribes, and Winnebago nations. The following tribal nations: Omaha Tribe of Nebraska and Iowa, Ponca Tribe of Nebraska, Sac and Fox of the Mississippi in Iowa, and Winnebago Tribe of Nebraska nations continue to thrive in the state of Iowa, and we continue to acknowledge them. As an academic institution, it is our responsibility to acknowledge the sovereignty and the traditional territories of these tribal nations, and the treaties that were used to remove these tribal nations, and the histories of dispossession that have allowed for the growth of this institution since 1847. Consistent with the university's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, understanding the historical and current experiences of Native peoples will help inform the work we do. Collectively, as a university, to engage in building relationships through academic scholarship, collaborative partnerships, community service, enrollment and retention efforts, acknowledging our past, our present, and future Native nations. Again, I want to acknowledge and thank the University of Iowa's Native American Council for creating this land acknowledgement. Moving forward, our speaker for today is Dr. Russ Ganem. Dr. Ganem is Professor of French and Associate Provost and Dean of International Programs at the University of Iowa. He joined the University of Iowa in 2011 as the Director of the Division of World Languages, Literatures, and Cultures, and served in that position until 2019. He moved to International Programs in 2020. Much of his career has been devoted to shared governance, including service as the President of University of Iowa Faculty Senate. He holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from Grinnell College, as well as a Master of Arts and a PhD from the University of Virginia. Dean Ganem is committed to advocating for international students, increasing study abroad opportunities, and promoting global education across the Iowa campus. Please join me in welcoming Dean Ganem.
Thank you very much, Yashwant, for that very generous introduction. And before we begin, in addition to thanking Yashwant, I also want to thank Amy Green, Amy Brewster, and Saralta Peterson from International Programs, who are lending tech support today and who helped organize our webinar for this afternoon. We have a terrific staff in our communications and constituent relations department in International Programs, and it's thanks to them that we're able to present such innovative and thoughtful programming. And so it's an honor for me to give the inaugural lecture in the Global Education Lecture Series. This is a collaboration between international programs and the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. This partnership between IP and DDEI has gone on for several years. We are seeking to strengthen it. And we are doing so through lecture series and also through the co-sponsorship of the Honor Society Phi Beta Delta, which reaches out to faculty, staff, and students who are committed to international education, global learning. We held a wonderful initiation ceremony for the Honor Society last fall and would encourage everyone attending this lecture to consider being part of Phi Beta Delta when the next call for membership goes out. So that said, the title of my talk today is From Pandemic to Promise, Rebuilding International Education in the Wake of COVID-19. And what I plan to do today is to give sort of a recap of when the COVID nightmare actually started. It was about a year ago now, and it's almost hard to believe that we've been, living in these Zoomvilles for, as they're called, for the last 11, almost 12 months, and we're going to be living in them for another few months. But I kind of wanted to walk you back first, and then kind of lead up to where we are now, and then start thinking about the future, because I think the future is actually pretty bright. Very promising, and that we are going to rebound and do so in very interesting and thought-provoking ways. So when we look at COVID-19, it was really a double hit back in January and February of last year, and especially with respect to international programs, there were two main facets of our operation that were impacted. Our international student community on the one hand, and then our study abroad operation on the other. And these are really the core functions of what we do in international programs, and now they have become vulnerable. And what we saw, not just at the University of Iowa, but really nationwide, was that international programs offices or education away offices, whatever they happen to be called at a particular institution, were really the first offices hit. They were really the first wave. And so the reaction of offices in international programs or study abroad really, in a lot of ways, set the tone for what was going to happen across the university. We were kind of the test case, as it were, because no one had faced a global pandemic, at least not here in the United States, for over 100 years, and it certainly hadn't affected international education to this degree. So our first order of business in our particular office was to bring order to uncertainty and chaos. And with respect to international students, again, we were placed in a difficult situation really from the outset, because our numbers of international students were already declining. And so even with that, I mean, we sort of had to put our recruiting efforts on hold and focus on taking care of the international students who were already here. And really the critical period was January through March of 2020, because the virus had emerged by then. International students from China and South Korea, other parts of the world, were returning to the US. And we were trying to figure out what the health protocols needed to be, what kind of testing they would get, how we would communicate. And this was sort of a major operation that we had to undertake on the fly. So we had a number of students from Wuhan and Hubei province. As we know, that's where the virus originated. So we focused on them first. We contacted them, inquired about their health. So we were able to track the students. We coordinated with student health. We monitored their symptoms. We mobilized different communication mechanisms, both here and in China, to make sure that the students had the resources that they need, and that they had the information that they needed in order to adapt to this situation. And we wanted to make sure that we would do everything we could to accommodate these students if they needed to be quarantined, if they needed medical attention, that we would have everything in place for them once they returned to Iowa City. Fortunately, most of our students were quite healthy. We did test some. A few had to be quarantined, but generally they came through unscathed. What was really unsettling, however, is that we had to deal with a number of incidents of racism and xenophobia in the wake of the pandemic. Some of these incidents took place in person. Some of them, many of them actually took place online. Nonetheless, many of our international students felt vulnerable, they felt threatened, and we needed to ensure not just their safety, but to ensure their advocacy on our part as part of what we do in international programs, and in particular in our Office of International Student and Scholar Services. So with respect to our international student community, they were hit hard by the pandemic, both financially and emotionally. Remember, when the pandemic hit, it was at least first localized in China, South Korea, Japan, to a certain extent, Taiwan, Singapore. And so the economic impact hit those parts of the world before they hit the United States. So we tried to put resources into the Student Emergency Fund in case students needed extra help. We tried to direct them toward other services that could be of use to them if they found themselves in circumstances of financial exigency. And then obviously the mental health aspect became even more important because of the emotional distress brought about by the pandemic. As noted, we confirmed our staunch advocacy for international students and the international community in general. We worked, for example, with our Chinese Student and Scholar Association. We worked some with the Chinese consulate in Chicago, who later sent President Harold a letter thanking him for our university's support of Chinese students and scholars. We wanted to make it clear in no uncertain terms that discrimination or bias based on perceived ethnic origin would not be tolerated. And that it was important to state this message at the beginning of the pandemic, and we reiterated it throughout the spring and summer, because the US government issued, and the Department of Homeland Security in particular, there were also some executive actions and executive orders as well that were quite hostile toward international students with respect to visa status, immigration, duration of stay, in addition to the travel ban that had been enacted in 2017. So we're dealing really with a situation where not only do you have a virus that is spreading rapidly throughout the world and basically shutting down travel and all sorts of travel, commerce, all sorts of interaction, but the United States was being seen as antagonistic to international students. So a lot of what we had to do was simply to allay students' fears while advocating for them externally. So in terms of our response and the comeback, we countered this narrative by in our public messages, as well as our recruiting messages, that we as an institution affirm our commitment to international education, that we underscore as well the value that international students and scholars bring to our community, and that our goal was to build and maintain this sense of community where our global citizens play just as large a role in maintaining the identity of the university as anyone else. We wanted to underscore the idea that we were one campus, one people, and that our resources, either in terms of advising resources, web resources, in some cases, financial resources would be dedicated to helping these members of our international community. At the same time that we were advocating from our office, from the Office of International Programs, and from the university itself, we want to urge students to advocate, international students especially, to advocate for themselves. As a result, we have sought greater engagement with our International Student Advisory Board and shared governance organizations, in particular undergraduate shared governance, and the Graduate Student Senate, as well as the Graduate and Professional Student Senate. This way, we can communicate with key administrators on campus. We can communicate with the Office of the Dean of Students, the Vice President for Student Life, to make sure that any issues related to international students are tended to and receive immediate attention. It's easy to, especially during a pandemic when we're all in sort of an emergency mode and reinventing our modes of instruction and our modes of interaction kind of spontaneously, it's easy to overlook certain members of our community. We wanted to make sure that that was not the case with our international students and scholars. So while many of our international students and scholars were able to make it back to Iowa City in January, or in some cases February of 2020, many remained in their home countries and took online classes. So we had to make sure that they had the available technology. We had to make sure that we worked with instructors and deans so that courses were made available again, or that advising services were also at their disposition. Again, it's easy to overlook these things, but we wanted to make sure that our students received all of the services that were necessary and that they deserved. So we tried to be flexible with respect to to students beginning their plan of study. In many instances, they deferred their admission by one semester, or in some cases a year. We had great help from senior administration in that regard. We wanted to bend over backwards to help students begin their course of study when it was convenient for them, and when they felt safe, and when they felt healthy. And so all of this necessitated greater coordination between international programs, the Office of Admissions, the program of English language learning, or English as a second language, academic advising, the Graduate College, and then the Tippy College of Business. So we formed all sorts of subgroups to study these issues. We conducted surveys so that we could gather data which would generate a more appropriate response to meet these needs. So all of this to say that our incoming class of international students is lower than normal, which is to be expected. And that these trends will continue given the circumstances. Nonetheless, we do see a way out, and one of the ways to do that is to continue highlighting the contributions of international students and scholars, and to make sure that their achievements are showcased as a point of pride for our university. So we reinforce and promote the idea that Iowa is a welcoming place, that education always precedes politics. As mentioned, the previous administration enacted policies that were not favorable toward our international students and scholars. A new administration is now in place. Many of these old policies were quickly rescinded, and that we see this as a very positive development within the world of global learning and intellectual and international experiences. So now that we see some of the restrictions being lifted, a more favorable climate being created, we can promote our goal a little bit more easily of creating an intellectual community where learning from each other is the common bond. That said, as we move into this next phase, the world obviously post-COVID, we'll have to focus on different parts of the globe to recruit new international students. So in the past, we have recruited a lot of international students from China. China will always be a big part of our international student recruitment efforts, but we're also looking at some parts of the globe where we haven't had as much activity, such as the Middle East, in particular the United Arab Emirates and Oman. Certain countries in Africa, such as Ghana and Kenya and Nigeria, look quite promising. Malaysia is another country where we think we can make some inroads, as well as Colombia in South America. So we've been working with faculty, we've been working with our admissions office, we've been working with U.S. Commercial Service in Des Moines to promote ourselves and to get ready for the next round of international student recruiting, so that we can make our campus look more like the world. I mean, I think that's one of our main objectives, not just in international programs, but at the University of Iowa as a whole. So with our international student operation, we obviously have our study abroad focus. And again, if we go back to February and March of last year, what we had to do was really upend and reverse everything that we had built. Within study abroad, you always have to plan for the worst. You always have to plan for scenarios where you have to bring everybody home. You hope you don't have to do that, but there's always the possibility of a pandemic, or there's always the possibility that a war will break out, or that there will be natural disasters. Our office spends a lot of time on health and safety issues, which again are kind of easy to ignore, especially in a period, and especially during the period we were in before, where anyone could go anywhere at any time almost. But that all quickly changed. So that disaster planning really came in handy a year ago at this time, because we needed to bring home everyone safely within a 2 to 3 month period, and we were able to do that. Now, we didn't bring everyone home at once because the pandemic itself spread in different waves. So it began in East and Southeast Asia, then spread to Italy, then the rest of Western Europe. After that, we had to focus on Oceania, so Australia and New Zealand, and then finally Latin America was the last region of the world where we had to bring students home. And this was very depressing. It was necessary, but it was quite dispiriting, because we brought home about 400 students, and their studies, their goals and dreams were all interrupted. They can't get their time back. We'd hear from students, we'd hear from parents. In many cases, they weren't necessarily upset with us bringing them home, although that was the case, in some instances, but they were more just sad about everything that had been lost. We know that students and their parents and their families had saved money, or in some cases borrowed money, that they planned their college careers around a semester abroad, and then all of it came crashing down. I still get quite emotional and quite dispirited when I think about it, because I can't get myself out of that funk sometimes, because we're not going to be able to make everyone whole and return everything to where we were, and that's something that we deal with. We accept that reality, but it doesn't make it any less painful. Nonetheless, we needed to shift to virtual programming. We did that quite quickly and quite successfully. So fortunately, there was a lot of student interest in virtual programming, either study abroad, as it were, or internships. Similarly, our Fulbright awards and applications are at their highest level. You heard the good news just today in Iowa Now. For the 6th year in a row, we were named a top producer. We went from 18th place to 12th overall. And if you look at the ratio of applications to awards, just doing the conversion rate, we rank #1 in the country. So this shows that our students are intellectually curious about the world. They are looking for experiences, either in terms of research or teaching or travel. And so our office has dedicated numerous resources to promoting Fulbright opportunities, toward mentoring students. We have a lot of faculty on board as well, a great staff. And all of this is encouraging, because even in the time of the pandemic, we've never seen greater interest, and we've never seen greater success. So this means that when we do come out of the pandemic, we will be ready to go, and our students will continue to shine. So in terms of the return to normal, vaccines are rolling out, thank goodness. The distribution has been in fits and starts. When I prepared this slide or adjusted it, I had heard that inoculations could be done by early summer. According to Dr. Fauci, now it looks like late summer. Nonetheless, if we are able to get everyone inoculated in the country by late summer, fall should be relatively normal. It won't be completely the same as it was before, but the world will start to look like the way it did before COVID-19 hit. That said, a vaccine is not a cure-all. We've got to develop herd immunity. We have to make sure that everyone is fully vaccinated. There's still a lot that we don't know about the virus, especially with respect to these new variants, but hopefully study abroad will be on the horizon for fall 2021. We regrettably had to cancel study abroad for this summer, but the fall is actually a good time for us to start sending students abroad again, because it's not necessarily a busy time for us. We can start piloting programs, work more closely with our provider programs or with our faculty-led programs to make sure that all of the health and safety protocols are followed, and that and this allows us, because we're not dealing with a high volume, to take extra time and extra measures to ensure safety. There is no doubt that next fall, and especially next spring, there will be all sorts of pent-up demand. There have been studies conducted during the pandemic and even historically, which point to the fact that if you look over the past 100 years, because international education is nothing new, it's been going on for centuries, but the data that we have at our disposal is really only about 100 years old. But there have been health crises, wars, all sorts of global disruptions over the past century. And each time, study abroad and international education has come roaring back. And so there's no reason to think that won't happen this time around. And so pent-up demand will be an issue that we will need to deal with. And we need to make sure that we've got the capacity to send students where they want to go, give them the proper advising resources and other sort of instructional advice, so that they are ready to go once things open up. So there are many opportunities that COVID has directly and indirectly provided us. There's no doubt that this time has reinforced the desire to collaborate between units. We've had, because of Zoom, because of the added convenience and just the ease of getting together, we've been able to reach out to certain constituencies on campus, certain offices on campus that we didn't have much contact with before. So, and these audiences have been quite receptive. As a result, the desire to collaborate is very strong, and so is the move toward the future with respect to faculty-led programs and provider programs. There's also new curricular design around global themes and challenges. We've seen that with the virtual courses that we were able to offer over the January term, and also with the courses that we plan to offer virtually this summer. So again, the current holding pattern has allowed for discussion and planning. This was the type of situation where, in the before times, as it were, we would always say, well, we never have time to sit down and plan. We never have time to sit down and think through and just talk to each other and brainstorm. Well, the pandemic allowed us to do that to a certain extent. And so it seems to me that that's one of the benefits, or one of the ways that we can take advantage of the current situation. Because if anything, COVID has underscored the importance of interdisciplinarity, teamwork, and problem solving. And so the post-COVID era is going to lead to, I think, a lot of academic innovations with respect to teamwork, with respect to collaborations, with respect to, say, for example, case competitions that bring students and faculty from disciplines that normally don't have much interaction with one another, to try and solve problems that the pandemic has either created or exacerbated. At the same time, there are a number of challenges that we will continue to face. There's a large access gap, which is access to resources, access to technology, access to education, that the pandemic has only exacerbated. So how do we bridge that gap, and how do we promote equity, equality, and inclusion? Because there's no doubt that domestic and global inequality not only has the chance to become greater, it, I think, has become greater in the wake of the pandemic. One need only look at vaccine distribution and access to the vaccines to underscore that point. And so there's no doubt that the world has become more digitally connected, but at the same time, it's become more divided because of the bandwidth gap. And so we're going to have to obviously redress some of those inequities and differences. And then the US will have to reestablish its reputation as a country open to the international community. What we've seen so far is a move in that direction, but it's going to take time. The world is extremely competitive, not just in a business sense, but in an educational sense. 50 years ago, 60 years ago, most of the top institutions of higher learning were in the United States. Now, anywhere from a third to a half of them are. So we've got international students and scholars who have many choices. They can come to the US, many of them still want to, but there's more competition from Canada, from Western Europe, from Australia, from Africa, from China. As a result, we in the United States are going to have to burnish our credentials, as it were, to make sure that we make international students and scholars feel welcome, so that we can maintain, if nothing else, our competitive advantage. With further challenges, we have to ask ourselves, does higher education, with some corporate and nonprofit support, go it alone? How much assistance are we going to get in terms of legislation? We know that there's the CARES Act. The Higher Education Act is supposed to be reauthorized soon, but in many instances, we see education dollars on the federal and state level, going to K through 12, which is perfectly understandable. But COVID also presents opportunities to reinvest in higher education at the governmental level, and in some instances at the corporate level. So we hope that, for example, there will be expanded grant opportunities to promote global learning as we move forward. And so, will there be coordinated and national and international efforts to rebuild educational infrastructure? And that and that question sort of leads to the next, and that is, how do we resist nativism, sectarianism, and insularity? That's kind of what got us into this problem in the first place. The fact that we were connected, but insular at the same time, which is a very sort of difficult paradox to maintain. The problems that we face moving forward in terms of climate, in terms of disease, in terms of cybersecurity, in terms of terrorism, are all global in nature, and they will require a global response. They will require national and international efforts to rebuild educational infrastructure. And so we've got this sort of outward-looking necessity on the one hand, but this kind of provincial attitude, at least in some corners of the world, on the other. And that conflict is not going to be resolved easily or quickly. And that's going to be a major challenge that we face as we move into the post-COVID era. So we are at this point at almost the 1-year anniversary of the COVID pandemic. By grace of our patience and our discipline, our campus has remained relatively healthy. Our community has remained relatively healthy. And that's because we observed the proper protocols and we adapted quickly. I think that higher ed deserves a lot of credit for moving its modes of instruction online almost immediately. This is something that you didn't see in every sector of the economy. So this is an instance where education, adaptability, creativity really comes in handy, because you're going to need those skills to adapt to the next disaster. So we need to embrace these new forms of connection and creativity, if for no other reason, so that we can at least insulate ourselves to a certain extent from the next catastrophe that is moving out there, and also so that we can grow as human beings and as a global community. So we know that as we approach this 1-year anniversary, many people are tired, and they are exhausted and frustrated. Being on the computer all day, seeing the same folks virtually every day. It's been, we have reinforced by no fault of our own, the insularity that led to some of these difficulties in the first place. So we need to seek rest, we need to seek inspiration wherever we can find it, and we need to get some distance on what we have experienced. It's going to be difficult, I think, for us to readjust to normal life, as it were, once we're able to, because because it's going to be another 6 months. And we haven't, none of us has really dealt with this before. So I think we have to give ourselves some time, be patient with ourselves as we learn to re-navigate the world. That's going to be sort of, from a psychological standpoint, that's going to be an obstacle that we're not quite prepared for. But we need to start thinking about it so that we can be as adjusted as we can be moving into our post-COVID reality. So looking ahead means looking inward as well as outward. This 1.5-year disruption, maybe 2-year disruption in our lives, has underscored the point that the world is ours. It does belong to us. We can effectuate change. We need to effectuate change, and that this change needs to be for the better rather than for the worst. I think that higher ed has provided or has come up with many best practices, has come up with some excellent ideas that should be replicated throughout society. So I hope that those of you on this call today or in this webinar today will take heart from what you've been able to accomplish and how you've been able to get yourselves and your units and your colleagues to this point. It's no small feat. Again, no one here has done this before. And so as I close, I say, I ask for questions, but I also say thank you. and congratulations for making it to this day and making it this far. So thank you. And if any of you do have questions, I would be more than happy to entertain them.
Thank you, Dean Ghanem. I'm sure that everybody on the call is virtually applauding you. That was a very informative presentation, and we appreciate your time and the information that you have shared with us. So in the remainder 19 minutes or so, we will welcome any questions that you might have for Dean Ghanem. So please make sure you enter your questions in the Q&A feature of the webinar. So Dean Ghanem, we have one question already, and this question is from a former student. They say that I represented the University of Iowa at several pre-departure events in Beijing from 15 to 19. My concern is that because of the US government's inability to handle this public health emergency, lack of mask mandate, no universal health care, and so on, the entire educational environment here is considered unsafe in many parents' minds, and not to mention the xenophobic incidences. So what's the long-term impact of this pandemic?
Well, I think in the long term, we will rebound, but there's no doubt that in the short term, we face many challenges. In the short and midterm, we face many challenges for the reasons that you have outlined. Simply because, travel restrictions are being lifted, simply because we have a vaccine, simply because we have a new administration in the White House, doesn't undo what has happened over the last, say, 1 to 4 years. This has been, I think, an extremely difficult period. And so what I think we need to do is to come up with effective strategies to address the issues that you have outlined, but also do our best to connect with students and their families to reassure them that Iowa City and the University of Iowa in particular is a safe place, that we have taken the proper precautions here, that we have protected our students, not just our international students, but our domestic students as well, and that our health record is actually quite impressive. Now, one could argue that that's kind of an insular, sort of hyper-focused approach, but I'm a parent of a college student myself, and I know that, with respect to my daughter's institution, these are exactly the types of questions that I'm asking as well. So I would take kind of a parent-to-parent approach, and let them know that I'm approaching this issue, and our university is approaching this issue, not just from the standpoint of, administration on sort of on the level of higher education, but on a very human level as well. So that can hopefully mitigate some of the anxiety that students and their parents rightfully face. It's perfectly, those attitudes and concerns are perfectly understandable.
Absolutely. Now, Dean Ghanem, you touched on this a little bit in your presentation. And so we already knew from the data that we see that the international student enrollment here in the United States has been on a decline. And the pandemic has just added to those challenges. And you talked a little bit about the new administration. So the question is, are there any specific set of policies that you're looking at? Or are there any specific pieces of legislature that you hope that the current administration will look at that will help at least stabilize that decline in international enrollment and to ensure that the US still remains a preferred destination for higher education?
Well, some of the encouraging action that we've seen so far is, first of all, that the travel ban has been lifted. Also, DACA has been not just preserved, but extended. Similarly, the duration of status or duration of stay rule that was proposed in or over the summer will not go into effect. Similarly, some of the proposed restrictions on H-1B visas will not go into effect. The same for J-1H visas and also M and F visas. So all of that is reason to feel hopeful. The other thing is that there has been for several years a backlog in terms of processing OPT, CPT applications. I know I'm getting a little bit in the weeds, or green card applications. The current administration is moving to loosen that bottleneck, for lack of a better term, or unplug that bottleneck. And so this should help us, at least, especially students in the STEM fields who want to stay in the United States or at least work in the US for a while. That should help their situation.
Absolutely. And just a follow-up question to that, I know you mentioned in your talk that the University of Iowa will be looking into some new strategies and some strategies that were not looked into earlier for recruitment. Are you able to share a little bit more or elaborate on what are some of those strategies for recruitment?
Right. Well, one of the things that we want to do is in a country like the United Arab Emirates or in Oman, for example, where we do have some alumni connections, is to build on those connections and hold alumni and recruiting events in those parts of the world. Malaysia would be another example. We've done this before in cities like Shanghai, Tokyo, and Seoul. But what we'd like to do is to combine alumni outreach with international student recruiting, especially in certain public and private high schools in those countries where the level of English is quite high, or maybe it's even the language of instruction, where students are either familiar with the American system of education or at least can adapt to it quite quickly and have adequate disciplinary and language preparation. And so we need to reestablish those particular connections and then market the university. It has, obviously the University of Iowa has all sorts of strengths. It's got a comparative advantage in the health sciences. It's got strong programs in business and engineering. And the UI branding campaign is emphasizing writing and communication. So we can offer a comprehensive Research One experience to our students in a very friendly, calm and safe setting. Similarly, we want to leverage some of the advantages we have with international student organizations on campus. We've got, for example, a Malaysian student organization on campus. We have several Korean student organizations on campus. And these relationships could be part of our marketing campaign because these students are already here, and students will listen to other students more quickly and more eagerly than they will to me or some other university official. So I think that's part of our strategy, at least moving forward. And I plan to devote more of my time to recruitment efforts and strengthening the relationship between international programs and the Office of Admissions.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dean Ganem. Another question that we have received here is that, is the University of Iowa planning to create financial support for economically disadvantaged countries where travel restrictions policies are or will be published for will be at a disadvantage for incoming international students?
Right. At this point, there are no plans to do that. However, all international students are considered for scholarships. We have a number of scholarships that we have at our disposal and we want to give international students every consideration. There's no doubt that the University of Iowa wants its campus to look like the world. International students contribute greatly to our campus community. We need international students as part of our commitment to a pluralistic and multicultural campus. And so we want, and we have talked about this with the Office of Admissions, we want to make sure that international student applicants are considered for every available resource at the university's disposal. There's also, in certain countries like Malaysia, Oman, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia is another, where the ministries of education or the ministries of culture award students from various economic backgrounds government scholarships to study abroad. We want to make sure that we are on those lists of preferred institutions to give these students every shot to come to the University of Iowa.
Absolutely. And then I have another question here, and the question says, prior to the COVID pandemic, some of us in international education were discussing the pros and cons of travel for educational purposes, given the need to combat climate change. How can we promote international education and work for sustainable formats for educational opportunities?
Right. Well, we need to come up with a hybrid approach. And again, this is an advantage that, or a favorable aspect, if you were, of the pandemic. We understand and we realize now how easy it is to get together. Just today, I have been on calls with colleagues in India and Europe, and it required minimal effort. Tomorrow, I've got calls with colleagues in Denmark and in Malaysia. So it's very easy now to reduce our carbon footprint, and we have to do this. At the same time, we do, for the sake of just creating and strengthening international relationships, some face-to-face interpersonal connections have to take place. It's, again, there is a human desire to do that. We need to acknowledge it, but there's no doubt that we have to travel less than we did before, because we need to respect and preserve the planet. I think it's pretty clear that climate change played a role in precipitating this pandemic. The same with the Zika virus and Ebola as well. As humanity continues its encroachment upon various ecosystems and other natural environments, the health risks become more frequent and more potentially lethal. As a result, we need to do what we can to stem that tide. And let's face it, it's a lot more convenient to connect via Zoom than it is to get on a plane every 10 days. So my sense is that what will happen is that we will come up with this hybrid format, but that because there will be a lot of pent-up demand, you will see a lot of folks traveling as soon as they can. That could last for about a year to 18 months. And then I think we will regress to this new mean, and that will be welcome. But the point is very well taken. Part of our commitment to global education has to be connected to preserving the environment.
Absolutely. And then there's another question here, and It says, are there steps towards bringing the gaps between domestic and international students? So bridging the gaps between domestic and international students. And the participant added that I know about student groups, but wondering if there are going to be more integrated efforts since there seems to be a disconnect and some of the xenophobia mentioned earlier.
Right. So we're doing a couple of things. One is, I'm a language teacher by training, and so in my old unit, the Division of World Languages, Literatures, and Cultures, we are starting some new initiatives to create conversation partners between domestic and international students, especially those students who are studying Chinese. The domestic students who want to hone their Chinese language skills, and the Chinese students who want to hone their English skills can be partnered together in a more sort of expanded format. There are already programs like this in international programs, but also in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences that we are partnering with. And so there will be some expanded activity in that regard. Similarly, I mentioned in the presentation connections to shared governance. We want to create more opportunities through shared governance, not just student associations, but also sort of planned activities and also curricular activities that bring together domestic and international students. Again, in my former unit, we came up with a series of courses where that were designed to foster project work, teamwork between international and domestic students. And it didn't happen just sort of organically. The courses were structured that way. So the students had to give presentations together. The design of the course was such that it appealed to both domestic and international students. And so it was that type of collaboration that was built into the curriculum. Those are the things that we need to foster with our faculty and students as we move forward.
Thank you, Dean Ghanem. And we are close to our time. So I appreciate, we'll close our session here. Dean Ghanem, again, thank you so much for sharing the information with us and answering our questions. I want to thank everyone who attended our session today. This is just the beginning of the conversation, the very first lecture in our series. So please watch for more information to come and for our future lectures in this series. If you are interested in being part of this initiative, also do feel free to email me and we can connect and move forward from there. So again, thank you for attending today. We hope to see you in our future sessions. Until next time, please do take care and do well. Thank you.